Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the annual general meeting of the Essex Wildlife Trust, and more specifically to our first digital AGM. So I have to admit that normally at this time of year, I would be worrying. I'd be worrying about marquees, I'd be worrying about guy ropes, I'd be worrying about toilets, car parking, whether we've got enough tea bags, all of those kind of things that you obviously don't realise goes on in the background, but it's a stressful time, but not this year. I'm afraid toilets and tea bags are purely your responsibility today. I have nothing to do with it, thank goodness. Now, these are obviously very unprecedented times, and we have a global pandemic, which has means it's neither safe nor possible to meet in the usual manner. And obviously that's really disappointing for the staff, for me personally, and for you as members, I'm sure, to get to meet up with, I guess, familiar faces and speak to people. And it is disappointing that we have to use a digital method today, but it's the right decision for all concerned. Now, today, I cannot legislate for power cuts, for freak lightning strikes, for broadband connection. If it's anything like last week where Virgin Media decided to dig up my road with no notice, who knows what's going to happen? But bear with us. I'm sure we'll aim to conduct a really professional and formal business without major incidents. So these are challenging times for us, as you know. It's a challenging time for all of us in life. But today we have the opportunity to test a new method of delivery to see maybe if we can reach more members through AGMs by offering a digital AGM in the future, potentially. People that may not wish to travel, or they may wish to cut their travel costs, or indeed those that are unable to travel to AGMs. So it's a great opportunity for us to test this and see how it goes. And maybe we'll do a hybrid model in the future, big tent and also digital, and we'll reach more people and more members, and that will be fantastic. Because obviously, as an environmental charity, we're currently looking very closely at our own sustainability right across the organisation. And the pandemic has really given us that opportunity to realise that we can actually deliver a lot of our meetings and a lot of our business remotely, and therefore cutting down our carbon footprint. So it's, as much as it's been a terrible situation for us all, as I said, it's given us these opportunities to really challenge ourselves and look at our operations. And this is one aspect which has been a big opportunity for us. So moving on to this morning's proceedings, it's my great pleasure to introduce our president, Professor Jules Pretty, who will be chairing the agenda today. And the Trust is incredibly fortunate to have someone of Jules's stature supporting the Trust. Jules is a Professor of Environment and Society at the University of Essex. He was formerly the university's Deputy Vice-Chancellor. He's an award-winning author. He may not tell people that, but I'll tell people on his behalf. Many books, an award-winning author, and he's a very esteemed public speaker. So we're very fortunate not only to have him chairing the meeting today, but also to have him as our president of the Trust. So Jules is going to start today by giving some perspectives on the climate crisis and what we can do as members and as members of the public to reduce our carbon footprint. So Jules, over to you.
And Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Just clicking the right buttons here. A pleasure to be with the Essex Wildlife Trust team and all the members who have joined us today. As Andrew has just said, I've got two jobs, running the AGM, which will start in a moment, but an introduction and some opening remarks about climate change and biodiversity and how the two tie together. I'm very proud indeed to be president of the Trust, and proud of our excellent work, which we'll come to a little bit later on in a hard year. And so I'm just going to kind of sketch the territory between the climate crisis, biodiversity, and how we live. It is some of it a somewhat kind of brutal context, but it's also the option for us to be optimistic. And I hope to give you a sense of the sorts of things that we can all do to make a difference in the next 5, 10, 20 years, which is the critical time. I prefer the term climate crisis now. We still use climate change, but I think it's right to just give a slightly more higher alert to our circumstances. This has happened in one generation, one human generation. In 1990 was a time of safety for us all on the planet. 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was a safe operating space for humanity. 2020, one generation later, is a tipping point. One generation on from here, 2050, would be too late. So we're at the critical point now. We've got 30 years to save us, save the planet. And indeed, as COVID has kind of shown, this is all about us. It's about our response to a set of challenges and whether we can come through that well. So a couple of little bits of data just to kind of set the context a little bit more. I mentioned 350 parts per million in 1990, the measure of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. It's about 413 to 415 now. That's 65 more than it was. And it's increasing at 2 per year. So if we went forward that 30 years to 2050, at the current rate, that would take us to 475 parts per million. I have to be blunt, that is dreadful. That would be an appalling outcome for the whole of humanity, let alone biodiversity, let alone the planet as a whole. We produce around about 50 gigatons, that's 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent worldwide at the moment, which is about 7 tons per person. And I'm going to make the point here, we're about 7 tons per person, more for rich countries, less for poorer countries. If we could get that to 1 ton, that would create a safe place for humanity. We would head back to 350 parts per million. It would be a route to success. In the UK, our average is about 7.5 tons, 7.7. So that gives you a kind of sense of how far we've got to go is from 7 to about 1. 6 tons each of us. That's your challenge. That's my challenge for each of us to do as quickly as we can. Just to make the point that there are huge inequalities here. There are 75 countries in the world where the individual per capita production of carbon is less than 1 ton. Those people in those countries need to consume more. They need safe water, food, housing, health, education. So they need to consume more, whilst the affluent and the rich consume less. The richest 1% of people in the UK and the rest of Europe have a carbon footprint of 55 tons. And the average for the country is 7.7. So there is a kind of challenge there. It's skewed quite a lot towards those who are high consumers at the moment. So we need to get to 1 ton. That's our challenge. Little story first. 3 years ago, I was in Iceland and traveled inside the Langjökull glacier, the second largest glacier in Europe. Dramatic, cold, scary, crevasses, the whole works. We've already increased the temperature of the globe by 1 degree, where we are now at the moment. And we're trying to limit through the Paris Agreement the additional increase by 0.5 or 1, which would be a success to a certain extent if we could achieve it. But at 2 degrees, 1 plus 1, all the glaciers in Iceland would disappear. There are 46,000 glaciers in the Himalayas, and they produce all the drinking water for the people in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and South China. At 2 degrees, 1 plus 1, all those glaciers would disappear during the course of this century. And that 1.5 billion people would have to find somewhere else to live. That's the kind of scale. That's why I think that now, in 2020, this is a really important moment for us to change the way that we live in order to reduce our carbon emissions. So we do need ambition. We need to be bold. We need to be fast. And we need to head towards 1 ton. André Sneer Magnusson, a writer from Iceland, has written, how do you say goodbye to a glacier? And I think that's a kind of pertinent point, because how do we say goodbye to many of the things that we take for granted? So what can you do? What can I do? There are 2 things, really. One is do things that don't use up the planet. As it happens, many of those things are actually very good for our health as well. And when we buy stuff, make sure it is low carbon. So material consumption needs to be green. And if we engage in activities that I would call non-material consumption, when we're just doing things that don't use up the planet, actually they're good for us. So if I just said something about that latter bit first, we've done, as many of you will know, 20 years of research on how nature is good for our health. So if you think of listening to birdsong, sitting in the garden, going for a walk around a reserve, sitting on the beach, watching a sunset. These are all activities that are good for our well-being, but none of them use up the planet. When you're sitting in the garden, you're not using up the planet. You're appreciating it more, and you're getting some benefit from it as well. Volunteering, togetherness, what some people call the kind of social capital of communities, is something else where we get a lot of a health benefit, but also others benefit from that as well. Volunteers, on average, live 2 years longer than non-volunteers. So there's a personal benefit from this non-material consumption as well. Let me come to the other side of the equation, switching to low carbon. We need, as I said earlier on, 6 one-ton projects each. Not all at the same time, because that's asking a little bit too much. But if we could imagine doing one thing and sequencing it and doing another thing and then another later on, if we could get to that 1 ton during the 2020, by 2030, if we all could do that across the UK, across the world, we'd be safe. We'd be fine. Big challenge. So here are some ideas as to what you can do. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the numbers are slightly different, and I've just picked the big ticket items. For example, a vegetarian diet will save you about 0.8 of a ton per year. If you can't imagine doing that, you could imagine having 2 meat-free days a week or 3, and saving half that amount. So some sort of change to the diet. If you only eat sustainable, organic, or local food, that'll save you about half a ton per year. You need to do it right across the year, every day. But that switch to consumption of food, making it more local, benefiting businesses within Essex, for example, that would be a good way of adding a half a ton to that challenge, that list I've mentioned. Transport, buy an electric vehicle. If you can, if you've got resources sitting there not being used, and you could get an electric vehicle, then an electric vehicle will save about 2 tons per year. The UK government has said by 2030, that's 10 years' time, every new vehicle in Britain needs to be an electric vehicle. So we're going to do this, but could we do it sooner? Norway has already said that every vehicle within their country needs to be an EV, electric vehicle, by 2025. That's kind of 4 and a bit years from now. They're leading the way. It's a dramatic, quick change. You could, of course, get rid of the car, cycle more, walk more. In doing that, that would save you 2 tons. My guess is that many people have been not using cars so much during the course of this year, and that actually will be having a benefit for carbon emissions. So we can think about electrification in that sense. Solar panels, put solar panels on your roof, 1 to 2 tons each, depending on the number that you can afford or put on. Planting trees is one of those ones where the co-benefits, as they're called, the side benefits are actually greater than the carbon benefits, because if you plant 10 trees, it will take 10 years to save 1 ton. So I think we're thinking, when it comes to trees, about next generations, about changing habitats, improving biodiversity, changing the nature of the landscape, building carbon resilience in the future, but it's not going to make a lot of difference in the 2020s. So I think we should be doing things that we need to do now that have an impact now, but also thinking of 10, 20, 50 years hence as well, getting that right. Plant trees would be great, but that's not going to make a big difference immediately to that 7 to 1 ton challenge. Switch to only renewable energy at home. That would save you 1.5 tons. And you need to make sure it really is renewable, because some of it isn't. Some of it is just carbon trading, and there's a kind of backdoor route to pretend it's green. You need to check that it really is a green source of energy. And then finally, the big one, which we've almost all stopped doing during the course of this year, flying. International flights, national flights, a big effect on carbon. London to Rome produces 0.6 of a ton one way, 1.2 tons return. London to New York, 2 tons return for each of us. London to Perth, Beijing, or Tokyo, 3 tons each way, 6 tons overall. So just cutting out 1 flight per year would contribute to that that reduction. If you can imagine changing international flight behavior significantly, that gets you towards the 1 ton that we were talking about. It's going to take the industry some time before they can produce renewable energy in aeroplanes. And so I think we're talking about a kind of 5 or 10 year period at least before that happens. So my advice is pick one and do it now if you can. And then when you've done that, pick another and aim to try to get towards 1 ton by 2025, 2030 maybe, as soon as possible. And my second point would be, and then tell others. We have a significant number of people at the meeting today. If you all told one other person, a grandchild, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, and they took it up, actually the effect of members of the trust would be significant. So my final thoughts then is to tie together this about kind of how we live, because I don't want us to feel as though this is going to be a real difficulty and a struggle. We've done a lot of research on what we call the good life, asking people all over the world, what is the good life for you? What do you value? What do you think comprises of the thing called the good life? And most cultures have a term for it. Bolivia and Colombia have actually written buen vivir actually into their constitutions. They now have a target as the good life within the country. It's interesting. And you know what? Every single return we've had, no one has said part of the good life is buying stuff, having things, having more things. What they say is preparing and sharing healthy food, physical activity, being in nature, wildlife, togetherness and social connections, giving and gratitude, all of that. And all of these things, as it happens, to tie to my point earlier on, help us live longer and happier and healthier lives. So that's in the end the trick to all of this. Can we get on a route towards reducing carbon, which actually is the sort of thing that we want to have a healthy and long and successful life? Things are getting better. We will see that in the impact report, and you'll have seen that in the video just now. During the course of the last few months, I've walked in South Essex to see the first ravens that have returned to Essex. 40 miles from the centre of London, a pair of ravens in a pine woodland. I sat in silence a month ago before dawn in the north of Essex, mid-north of Essex, listening to the slapping and the chuckling of beavers in the water in front of us. The 2 kits were born earlier this year, the first beavers in Essex for 400 years. I'm sure we all have stories of things that have come back and things that we're worried about, butterflies that have come, butterflies that haven't come, birds that have migrated or haven't. But there is good news to look at, and we should celebrate that. So I've finished the talk by urging 2 things. Choose low carbon options if you can, start the journey towards the 1 ton, and choose activities that make you happy, because actually they'll probably save the planet too. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jules. Wonderful as ever, very thought-provoking. And it really does put things into perspective, both the terrifying prospect of what we're going towards, but also the very simple solutions that we can have. And I know, we go home and we see stuff on the news, and it sometimes can be overbearing. It's just like one bad thing after another, and then some big decision maker or politician makes what we would consider to be a bad decision, and you think, well, if they're not going to make the right decision, then we don't have any chance. But I think what Jules is really clearly describing is that lots of very small good decisions really do add up. And I know that takes a lot of responsibility on all of us. It can't just be 1 or 2 people. It has to be a collective. But we must never think that our little contribution is not going to have an effect, because there is a real, I believe, a real sea change now. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with, we talk about David Attenborough and Blue Planet. And also, let's think about the Greta Thunberg effect, that little girl from Sweden, very unassuming, and yet she's been in Downing Street. She's been over to the White House. She's talked to the UN. She's talked to the G8 summit. She's opened doors that me or Jules could probably only ever dream of getting into. But she's managed it, and she's not just gone to these things, but she's mobilized millions of children all around the world and really raised the profile. So if a 16, 17-year-old girl can do that, who has no experience of this other than just a concern, then we have to believe that it is possible for things to change. So I think we have to really take heart with what Jules is saying, and also focus on those small things. I love what Jules is saying about telling people, just share it, whether it's your friends, family, the person that cuts your hair, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be in a preachy way. It can just be in a passionate and well-informed way that you're just sharing that message. And also, again, what Jules was saying about there's lots of research out there that suggests that having lots of things doesn't make us happy. This material world that we all get sucked into, the evidence is very clear that it doesn't make us happy. So we have to kind of push away from that. But the little things, I think, are really important. A big one for me, I'm quite well known in my house and my family for being a bit of the sort of wasting food police. I hate to see food wasted. Food production and food consumption and food distribution are a real source of negative effect on the planet in terms of the resources, the energy involved and everything else. So yeah, just simply not wasting food and not wasting energy. Those are things that probably as a kid, turn the light off, don't waste electricity. I hate throwing food away. So please take away from this that actually all our little relatively small individual things will add up and will have a really big effect. So yeah, very thought-provoking. Thank you, Jules. That was fantastic, and lots of takeaway thoughts and actions for us to do. So before we start the business of the AGM, I just wanted to explain how the voting will work today. So each item that requires a vote will be launched on your screen. Now, I know this might be, for some of you, this will be, I've done this before. Some of you, this will be, oh, this sounds exciting. Some of you will be thinking, my God, this sounds terrifying. This sounds like my worst nightmare. What's going to happen? You will basically just see a question that will come up on the screen, and you will have an option to choose vote for, abstain, or vote against. The question stays up for a few seconds, and then the count is automatically calculated. There will be no proposers or seconders because our voting will be automatic via this user poll. Now, we've received a high number of postal votes, proxy forms, and we will add these onto the screen count and then announce if the motion has been carried. The voting numbers will be published on our website over the next few days. So if you are interested to see those exact details, you'll be able to find that out at a later date. Now, I know that sounds a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest. We're not going to take scores from all over the world. It's just a very simple voting form. It will be very, very simple. And Jules will take us through the process seamlessly and effortlessly. So I'll now hand back to Jules to do the formal section of the AGM.
Thank you, Andrew. Me again, now with a different voice. Welcome to the AGM. Good morning to all of you. 61st Annual General Meeting of the Essex Wildlife Trust. Thank you for attending. Kind of you to click on a Saturday morning before the hurricane comes later on today. So hopefully all will be well during the morning. We've received, so I'm just going to be your host during the formal part of the AGM and take us through towards the end when Andrew will do some questions and answers that we had received. We have had a number of apologies. I'm not going to read them out. They will be listed on the website after the event. We're going to have in what's called the special business later on in the meeting, AGM special business, come to voting for the scrutineer, the independent scrutineer, Penny Carter, for the next year ahead. Penny is our scrutineer today. She is overseeing the voting and the counting, and she was appointed at last year's AGM. So just to make the point that the appointments are formally for 12 months ahead, and the last year's AGM was the 5th of October, so we're making the assumption that it's for the period between two AGMs rather than 12 months plus 3 weeks from the 5th to the 24th of October. So Penny will be overseeing this, and we'll come to asking for your approval for her to continue as scrutineer for the next year ahead. So item 1 of the AGM ordinary business is consideration of the minutes of the AGM held on the 5th of October 2019. The minutes were included in your invitation pack and also posted on the website. We'd like to ask attendees, members at the meeting to vote for the minutes. Are you content to accept these minutes? I'll ask the organisers now to launch the first vote. You have about 10 or 15 seconds. Just use your mouse, click on the choice that you have in front of you, vote for, abstain, or vote against, and then we will move ahead. So it's just come up now. As a member, I accept the minutes of the AGM. Could you please vote? Okay, I think that's 10 seconds, slightly more, in fact. Result received, motion carried. Thank you very much, everybody. We now move on to item 2 of the agenda, which is matters arising. Formally, but there are no matters arising. We received several questions relating to the trust and the last year. And they have come through. They will be taken up in the Q&A later on. I've had the result in front of me, and I can confirm that those minutes were accepted. So that was item 2, matters arising. We will move swiftly to item 3. So this is consideration together of the impact report, and then in the second half, the report from the Honorary Treasurer on the financial statements. And there'll be one vote for these in a moment for the financial statements. Not a vote on the impact report, but this is the point when we consider this. I just wanted to remind you, this is our annual report as framed in terms of an impact report this year. And if you'd particularly like to turn to the centerfold, you can see the summary, the very helpful numerical summary of a whole range of outcomes. 1.5 million visitors, 40,000 members, just under now for the Trust, which is wonderful. Thriving wildlife across the county, 101 sites managed now by the Trust. And you can see how these impacts fit into the strategic plan for 2020 to 25. The Trust is committed to looking at everything through this lens, including the conservation and education work that was undertaken. And so hence we have this kind of reimagining of the formal annual report, an impact report, which I think is really helpful because we want to be sure that we are achieving what we said we would, and that we challenge ourselves to be better each year. So you'll see that not only in the centerfold are the achievements, but there are also changes over the course of the year, whether particular numbers are up or down. Members, for example, are up 1,200 in the past year, which I think is pretty good considering the challenges that we have had. So I commend the document as a true and proper reflection of the activity undertaken in the 2019 to 2020 period. And as the second part of item 3, I'd now like to hand over to our Honorary Treasurer, Bob Holmes, who will take you briefly through this next item on the agenda, the financial statements for the period of 2019. Bob, are you ready to take the floor, the digital floor?
Yes, I am, Jules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll hand over to Bob now.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. As Jules has said, my name is Bob Holmes, and I'm very pleased to have had the honour to take over from Keely Hazelhurst as the Treasurer earlier this year when I rejoined the board. And I'd like to start by thanking Keely for the work she's done in that role over the last 4 years, and also I think to congratulate her on becoming our new chair of trustees. What I'd like to do in this brief presentation is to give you all an overview of the trust finances for last year, 2019, to show you where its income came from, what it spent that income on, and the resources it had in hand at the end of that year. And I'm also going to say a few words about 2020 and the impact that COVID-19 has had on the finances this year. If you do have any questions on my presentation, by all means post them in the Q&A section that is at the foot of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them. I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the meeting, provided we have time to do. So could I have the first slide, please? The next slide, please. That's the one, thank you. So on this slide, I've summarised the main figures from the Trust's 2019 Consolidated Statement of Financial Activities, and that's accountants' jargon for the income and expenditure of the Trust and its 4 subsidiaries during the course of the year. Now, when Katie spoke to you at last year's AGM, she anticipated that 2019 would turn out to be a better year than 2018 was, and I'm very pleased to say that she's right. The Trust income and its expenditure were both higher than the previous year, and there was an operating surplus of £1 million compared with a small loss in 2019, and that you can see on the third line on the table there. The statement further below the operating surplus also records changes in the value of during the year of the Trust's long-term investments and its pension liabilities. The Trust has a significant amount of money invested for the long term, as I'll show you later. And at the end of 2018, investment markets were depressed, but they bounced back during the course of early 18 and continued to rise during the year. So these improved valuations added a further £1.8 million to the Trust funds during the year, compared with a loss of £800,000 that it incurred in 2018. So overall, it was a very positive year, as our total funds increased by 2.8 million, from just over £27 million at the end of 2018 to just short of £30 million by the end of last year. Can I have the next slide, please? This slide shows you where the income came from and how much there was in 2019. That's the dark green bar, and how much in 2018, the light green. And just in case you can't read too easily the words underneath, I'll point out each one as we go through them. If we look first perhaps at the second set of bars, that's a big increase in income from grants, donation and legacies last year. A lot of that was a grant that the Trust received in anticipation of redevelopment of the Land and Nature Discovery Centre, and that's money that we're spending in 2020. But there was also an increase in income from legacies in 2019. That's a trend that has also continued into 2020. And we'd like to express our thanks to everybody who donates to us in this way. It's a very important part of our income. The fourth pair of bars along, which is the largest pair, shows the income from the Trust trading companies, i.e. that's the sales company, which sells cups of coffee and other refreshments, as well as items in the shops in the nature discovery centres. And the other trading company is ECOS, through which ecological consultancy services and farming activities have been conducted. And this is overall the biggest source of income, almost a third of the total. You can see that that also rose in 2019. And you may remember in 2018, this income was hit by the beast from the east, amongst other things. But it's also an area which, as you can imagine, has suffered in 2020 as a result of nature discovery centres having to be closed during the course of the pandemic. There's a relative, in the first set of bars, that's membership income and fundraising, there's a relatively small increase, but nonetheless an important one as member numbers grew. And income that we got to support our charitable activities, the middle set of bars of just over £2 million, and investment income, the income we earn from our long-term investments, were very similar in 2019 to the level that we had in 2018. So that's where the income comes from. And if we move on to slide 3 now, this shows where the income is, where we've spent money. The first 2 pairs of bars show the money that the Trust has been spending on its charitable activities. The first pair of bars, money it's spent in reserves, conservation, people and wildlife, has increased in 2019, and that I think is a good thing, because the more money we're spending on things like that, the more we are doing in achieving our charitable objectives. The second set of bars were the cost of running our nature discovery centres, which you can see is slightly less in 2019 than it was in 2018. And the third set of bars is the money costs of earning the trading company's income that I explained and took you through on the last slide. Costs such as purchasing items that we have we put on sale in the discovery centres. But there's also quite a lot of staff costs, people costs in that number as well. It's a big figure, but I think what's most important is that the income from these companies is even bigger. These activities made a net contribution of £500,000 last year. That's around about 20% of the money we spend on reserves, conservation and people, or about half the operating surplus that the Trust has. If I now move on to the next slide, please. This fourth one summarises the balance sheet of the Trust at the end of last year, showing on the right how the total funds of 29.9 million were split between the various types of funds we have, and on the left, what they were investing in. Now, if we look at the left-hand chart first, you can see that there's a lot of money in the Trust fixed assets. That's the dark green bar, which is invested mainly in property that the Trust owns. And there's also a lot of money in the light green section, which is the Trust's long-term investments. Investments which are in a range of different but ethically managed investments, which are held for us through our investment managers, Saracens. But you can also see in the net assets on the left-hand side, that light blue segment at the top, short-term investments and cash, were almost £3 million at the end of last year. So we had quite a lot of funds ready for use should we need them in terms of cash balances. On the right-hand side, the point I want to make here is that although our total funds are nearly £30 million, they're not all there to be spent without restriction. And this chart illustrates that point. If we look at the light blue segment first, the endowment funds, we can only spend income that is earned from investing those funds. And although if we look at the dark blue funds, the restricted funds, we can spend both income and capital on our charitable activities. It can only be used for the specific causes or projects for which that capital was donated. On the right-hand side, the light green funds are designated funds, which are funds which we have accumulated, but the trustee board has decided to spend on specific projects where we know what action is required. For example, the rebuilding of the Visitor Discovery Centre at Langdon. So it's really only the general funds of £4.5 million in the top dark green segment that we might regard as free, and prudent financial management means that we have to keep some of that in reserve for what we'd all recognise as rainy days, and we've seen some rainy days in 2020. When the lockdown came in March and the Trust and its subsidiaries ceased normal activities, Nature Discovery Centres closed, work on reserves was severely curtailed. While some staff were able to continue to work from home, around 70 were furloughed. But thanks to the government support for furloughed schemes, which allowed the Trust to keep paying their wages at no cost to itself, together with other grants that are available to the organisations that pay business rates, such as business rates that we pay on the Nature Discovery Centres, those grants and the furlough payments have helped us get through this time. And I'm pleased to say the Trust finances have remained in good order. And we also, of course, have had the comfort of that cash cushion, which we brought forward from last year that I just showed you. Now, although the Nature Discovery Centres have now reopened and staff are back at work, both regular income and expenses will be down in 2020, in some areas quite significantly down. And we won't have spent as much this year on furthering our charitable objectives as we had planned. However, we remain in a sound financial position, able to withstand any further consequences from the second wave of the virus that seems to be coming during the coming winter, and ready to resume spending again as and when the nation is able to put the pandemic behind it. And that is thanks in no small part to the continuing support of you, our 39,000 members. So finally, if I go on to the last slide, I think I'd just like to wrap up by saying a word of thanks to all of those who've put together the 2019 annual report and accounts this spring in the most extraordinary circumstances. And particularly to our recently departed Head of Finance and Services, Rebecca Bolthouse, and all of her team in the Finance Department, as well as the auditors at Moore, Kingston Smith, who have had to do their work remotely this year, rather than crawling over boxes of files at Abbots Hall Farm as they usually do. I'm pleased to report that the auditors issued an unqualified report on the financial statements, and the Board of Trustees approved those statements formally in July. It's been a major achievement by all concerned, and very well done to everyone. So it just remains to me to propose the next two resolutions that we're going to be voting on, which you'll see on my final slide here. First of all, that taking item 3 and 4 of the agenda together, the impact report and the audited financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2019 are received. And secondly, again, we'll put these together in one proposal that we reappoint, the meeting reappoints our auditors, Moore, Kingston Smith, LLP, as auditors for the Trust for the year ended 2020, and authorise the trustees to agree the auditor's remuneration. So thank you all very much for your attention, and can I just conclude before handing back to our President that I hope to see you all in person in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Bob. That was excellent. Right. Really good coverage of the issue. So we've got 2 votes ahead of us after that clear and concise presentation. I'm going to ask members to vote on those in a moment. Just a couple of remarks, first of all. Questions and answers that relate to the finances of the Trust will be picked up by Andrew later on. We had a number of questions submitted. Actually, many were to do with responses to COVID, of course, at the end of the meeting. But there have been 2 questions that have come through the Q&A, and I think it's worth answering that one now. Questions about how many people are present at the meeting. In the real world, back in the old days, you could look around the room and see how many people were present. So it's kind of 1 here, but actually it's 133 altogether at the AGM. So thank you everybody for attending. I think that's remarkable and a testament to your support for the Trust. So thank you for that. We have 2 votes ahead of us now. So the first vote will be to receive the impact report and to approve the audited financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2019. Could we bring that vote up on the screen now, please? Could you vote? There'll be a bit of music in the background. We'll have the elves and eager beavers counting up the votes as we speak, and they'll let me know whether I can then report back to you. So could you vote and then press submit, and then we'll know what the numbers are. So just a pause for a moment for that. Thank you. The motion is carried. Thanks very much. The elves have reported back to me in full. And thank you for voting. I think it's a bit quicker now that we've got the hang of this. We then come to the next vote, vote 3, which was on items 5A and 5B. As Bob just reported, we'll take these as one question. We'd like to reappoint Moore, Kingston Smith LLP as the auditors and authorise the Board of Trustees to determine their remuneration. Could we then please have vote 3, and we'll just do the same again, please. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That motion is also carried. as Andrew said at the beginning, we are going to report the actual numbers on the website afterwards. So if you want to go back and have a look at those, we'll do that. But I can say that has been carried. Thank you. So we now move to item 6 on the agenda, the election of trustees. There are 9 trustees standing at this AGM and effectively 9 spaces. So I think you should have the collage of photographs up in front of you now, and you can see the names of the willing people to stand as the board members: Malcolm Hardy, Michelle Wall, Bob Holmes, who's just been speaking to you, Sarah Balzer, Catherine Hawkins, Toko Kami, Naomi Kingston, Ellen Simonson, and James Wren. Thank you to all of those for being willing to stand and to help the trust with your expertise. If indeed those are approved, the biographies are detailed on the website. The board itself commends these fine individuals to sit on the board and oversee the strategic direction for the organisation in the future. So there are 9 candidates and 9 vacancies. So I'd like to suggest, in the interest of time, we vote for the trustees en bloc, not for each of them. Past AGMs, we have had competitions for space, as it were, but that's not the case this year. So I'd like to ask members present at the AGM to engage in our 4th vote. So, and this vote is, as a member, I approve the appointment of the 9 trustees listed there. You saw their pictures, the bios are online. Could you please vote now? Thanks very much. Okay, thank you very much indeed again, everybody. Motion carried comprehensively, so that's splendid. Thank you, Penny, for acting as the scrutineer for confirming those numbers to me. We have all sorts of electronic devices going on in the background to complement the real wildlife that's carrying the messages swiftly between each of our bases to let us know. So thank you for that. That now concludes the ordinary business of the AGM. We just come now to the special business, another vote, and we'd like to ask if you would vote to appoint an independent scrutineer again for a further 12 months. Penny Carter, who has acted as independent counter and arbitrator for voting for this last year, is willing to stand again to fulfill this role for us for another year. So I'd like to ask members again to approve the proposal of Penny acts as scrutineer. You can see the vote is up on the screen in front of you. Please cast your vote and I'll let you know what the outcome is. Okay, thank you, everybody. Comprehensively carried again. Thank you very much indeed. That seemed to work kind of really rather well, actually. So I shouldn't sound surprised. It seemed to work really well. Thank you, everybody. Marvellous. So I can confirm that we have a scrutineer for the further year ahead until the next AGM. A year from now, goodness knows where we'll be in the world. We hope we're just going to be having an ordinary AGM, but let's see. But we do know we'll have a scrutineer. So thank you, Penny, for agreeing to help us on that front. And thank you, everybody. There's no AOB for the AGM. So that concludes the formal business of the AGM. We've now reached the question and answer session. So I'm going to hand you over to Chief Executive Dr. Andrew Impey again. He's now going to run us through the last section of the meeting. If you've got further questions that you'd like to add to the button at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, you'd be very welcome to do so. All of these will be posted on the website. I'm looking across the screen just to check from colleagues that is going to be the case. Fiona's putting a thumb up, so that's fine, including full answers. So if there's anything you feel has been missed out or not completely comprehensively covered, we can't do the back and forth that we would normally have at an AGM. But Andrew will now take just a few minutes to pick up the most important of those questions and answers and to speak to those. And then we'll move to the one award before the end of the meeting and then draw things to a close. So thank you very much, members, again. I hand over to Andrew to pick up a few of the questions and, of course, the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules. I'd rather put you on the spot saying that it was going to be seamless and effortless, but you didn't let me down. It was. Thank you very much for taking us through that. And thank you to Bob as well for taking us through the finances in such a clear manner as well. So we're just going to go through some of the questions now, and I'll try and do them in as much detail as possible, but I'll try and go through them as quickly as possible as well, so that it doesn't feel like you're just listening to me droning on. But it's important to answer these questions, and it's really exciting for us to receive these questions. This is your Wildlife Trust. You're the members, and therefore it's your Wildlife Trust, and therefore it's great that you're interested and engaged enough to ask the questions in the first place. So it's fantastic. So apologies if I get anyone's surname incorrect, but I shall do my best. So Mrs. Bancroft Hall, your first question: how will it be safe to visit Abberton Wildlife Centre in the future? Medical issues, for example, asthma, will prevent you from coming inside for purchases and refreshments. So yeah, the Trust has got strict COVID measures at the minute in place in all of our centres to ensure that it's safe for people to visit. We undertake regular and thorough cleaning processes on all of our sites. Masks must be worn inside, hand sanitizers available, social distancing, one-way systems are in place, and the food offer is currently limited to takeaway. And we ask all of our visitors to check via the track and trace QR codes. But in your circumstance, obviously, you're saying that it's with asthma, you can't come in the centre. And I understand that. I've got family members as well that can't go inside buildings because they're shielding. And it's very difficult. And I completely sympathise. But should individuals not be able to come into our nature discovery centres, but you can get access to the nature reserve, which you can at Abberton, if you were to give us a quick call in advance, or even ask someone on the door, we would be able to let you access the site via the side gate and give you access directly to the nature reserve. So hopefully you won't be precluded from enjoying Abberton, even if you're unable to come into the building for health and safety reasons. So please just let us know and we'll try and accommodate you wherever possible. In Abberton, we certainly can accommodate you there. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, you said, can we make all EW all EW locations COVID compliant so that we can enjoy visiting them again? Well, as I've said, all of our nature discovery centres are COVID secure. We did choose to open them individually in a very much a phased approach, which, although this was frustrating for many people, not accessing their favourite site, it has meant that we can thoroughly check all of our processes to check that they were working and that the sites were as safe as possible. So we review all of our changes to government restrictions, and we will put new precautions and procedures in place as soon as possible if there are any changes to those restrictions. In terms of our nature reserves, we ask all of our visitors to practice social distancing and respect the rule of 6 to keep themselves safe and other visitors safe. So as far as we're concerned, we're following all of the guidelines. All of our visitor centres and all of our reserves are as safe as they possibly can be in terms of COVID. And if anything changes, we will change with those changes as well. Gillian Seymour Pugh, you have asked, what plans for 2021 do the board and strategic leadership team have to counter the effect of COVID and to take Essex Wildlife Trust forward? So this is a good question. And in one sense, it's quite a hard question because at the moment, we obviously don't know how long COVID is going to last. So there are many aspects of this pandemic where we're kind of learning on the hoof. And that sounds kind of unprepared, but this is a brand new thing. This is very much unprecedented. So we are learning as an organisation, just like every other organisation, as things develop. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't put plans in place. We have responded, as I've said, very quickly to change our offer in centres, and we will continue, as I said, to respond to those guidelines and change things. In terms of conservation, we're looking across all of our sites to prioritise our efforts on those areas so that we can have the biggest possible impact for wildlife. So we're looking at, if we have to prioritise, where are we going to prioritise and what are we going to prioritise on? In terms of our education delivery, we're also looking to see if we can make changes to our formats to allow us to continue with this vital engagement with children and teachers and accommodate those changes, but still have access to people if we can just tweak the way that we're delivering that education activity. Many of you over lockdown will have seen the success of Wildlife TV, where we had a programme of daily wildlife videos, which was rolling for a number of weeks. And it was hugely successful, accessing a large number of people throughout, not just Essex. We were getting hits from all over not just all over the country, all over the world. I think we had someone in the Falkland Islands that was regularly logging on to Wildlife TV. So people were logging on all over the place. And that was a really novel way of tweaking our communication activity, but still being able to accommodate those COVID things and challenges. We're currently planning our budget at the minute for next year, and we're looking at the potential for new income streams to see if we can diversify that financial risk. We all know about the risks, and Bob has already touched on those in terms of the challenges with our discovery centres and the finances coming in. So we're looking to diversify those income streams to see if we can mitigate some of those financial risks. The office-based staff have obviously been largely working from home since March, and we're looking going forward to potentially having a hybrid model going forward of people working from home and coming into the office if possible in the new year. So we'll see how that goes. But as I said right at the start, the lockdown has really provided us to look at aspects of our work, our sustainability, our carbon footprint, our equality, diversity, inclusion, all these sorts of things. So despite COVID, we are pushing the Trust forward in all areas of our work. So hopefully, Gillian, that's convinced you that we are, despite COVID, really pushing the Trust forward. John and Diane Camp, you asked, what are we doing to encourage more? You had two questions. First one, what are we doing to encourage more people to visit nature reserves for the purpose of watching wildlife instead of just walking around, chatting and disturbing everything? You talk about the impact report where only 11% of people coming to our sites come to visit wildlife. Well, that 11% relates to our nature discovery centres specifically. So that number is always going to be a bit skewed because we obviously have a diverse offer at our nature discovery centres. It's not just about wildlife. It's about, we've got a cafe, we've got retail, we've got a play area, we've got trails. So there will always be a bit of skewing. But of course, we want more people to be engaging with wildlife. So we're using various communication channels to highlight wildlife spectacles across the county. We will actively push people to engage with those sites. We will use some channels to talk about iconic species in Essex and inspire people to go and look for wildlife. We will also highlight various projects at reserves where we are having impact for wildlife. We are delivering a big signage interpretation project throughout all of our sites, and that will allow us to have better communication with people once they're on site, and it will also allow us to have more regular seasonal communication with people. But at the same time, I think we should also point out that we shouldn't underestimate the value of multiple user groups. For example, if you have a site and it's got 150 birders come to that site, bird watchers, that's fine. And as a bird watcher, I can say that. But also imagine that 150 divided by a suite of people, 30 bird watchers, 30 walkers, 30 artists, 30 mums or dads with buggies, 30 school children. You still have 150 people, and there's more value then to that site because there's a more diverse section of people in Essex that are coming to use it. And that gives us more opportunity to inspire a new audience, get more people excited with wildlife. So our nature discovery sites aren't just preaching to the converted. The big role that they play is inspiring people who've never previously felt that they would be interested in wildlife. It's an inclusive offer. So yes, we want more people to be coming to look at wildlife, but I don't mind if we have people that are coming for a cup of tea or are coming to use a play area, because it's bringing people in and getting them to engage with wildlife. And this brings me on to your second question, which was, what are we doing to encourage young people to visit for the purpose of learning about wildlife and conservation, and instead of encouraging kids to play on zip wires or climbing frames? You say that we're entrusted with wildlife, not playgrounds and country parks. And that's, in your belief, what we're turning our reserves into in some cases. Well, let me reassure you that we only have 4 sites out of our 101 sites where we have outdoor equipment, and these are on our nature discovery sites. And as I've said, we want Essex Wildlife Trust to be that inclusive charity offer. We want to encourage more diverse groups of people in order for people to gain that love of wildlife and nature. For many people, nature is not an important part of their lives, and we need to create different opportunities so that we can encourage people to really actively engage with nature. To begin with, it may just be, I don't know, something like a small natural outdoor equipment, a few wooden stepping stones to encourage that visit. But then actually they will start to learn about wildlife and they'll get engaged. And also, let's not forget about the incredible success of our forest schools, our outdoor learning team. Last year, over 76,000 kids, we were engaging with throughout the county. So we are really pushing that engagement with children. But, we have to think, if we're trying to engage people in Essex, I believe we have to use every tool in the bag to get as many people from as many different backgrounds to engage with wildlife as possible. And you've probably heard me talk about the little girl at Thorndon before, but I'll mention it again. She was there. I saw her with her mum. She went to the Gruffalo Trail. And yes, people think, oh, there's a Gruffalo Trail there. It's not about wildlife, but it is about wildlife. She was looking for the Gruffalo, but then she saw a squirrel. The squirrel was burying an acorn. She asked her mum what the squirrel was doing. The squirrel was burying it for the winter. Her mum was explaining about food caching, which is a really important, quite complex ecological function. She was learning about squirrels, but she'd gone to see the Gruffalo. She heard woodpeckers, she saw wildlife. She saw all sorts of things. She was learning about the oak trees. So actually, as much as we have a few things in our nature discovery centres which aren't just about wildlife per se, we need to engage with everyone in Essex with wildlife. It's not about us just being a nature club for nature users. We have to inspire everyone in Essex to get excited about nature, because that's how we protect nature, by having everyone in Essex really excited about it. Helen Utting, why is fingering hose still not open? Are we able to use it? Or is it all closed off? I think this question probably came in, was submitted before the changes. So Fingering Hoe Nature Reserve is open 5 days a week from Thursday to Monday. The centre is open from Friday, Saturday and Sunday, with the aim of opening for more days. So please do give us a call to check on opening times, or go to our website to look for those opening times. Can anything, this is Mr. Morrison, can anything be done about noise pollution created by aircraft practicing their manoeuvres above Abberton? Unfortunately, not really from our point of view. I think this is something that really needs to be raised with the Civil Aviation Authority. I can mention it to Essex and Suffolk Water to see what they say, but this would really be for the Aviation Authority to determine whether those light aircraft are not adhering to restrictions, but it's not really something that the Trust can have any control over, I'm afraid. Ron and Morel Elliston, you sent a very long question, which I'm not going to read out in its entirety because it was well over 350 or 330 words. So I'm going to paraphrase it, if that's all right. And it was basically around our badger logo that you will have seen in the magazine. So we gave them the badger logo a facelift. So why did Essex Wildlife Trust decide to retain the badger when you updated the logo? And will Essex Wildlife Trust continue to conform to an unlimited support of this now ubiquitous badger, or instead lead a campaign to protect the endangered hedgehog? Now, I know, Ron and Morel, we've had some conversations with you before about badgers. I know that you have issues with badgers and you have very passionate feelings about badgers and the effect that they have. But just to be clear from our perspective, so we retained the badger as our logo, and that was a decision that was made by the board in July 2019. And the decision was really based on the pros and cons of evolution, which would be retaining the badger, or revolution in terms of dropping the badger. So in terms of revolution, the board agreed unanimously that prioritising a full rebrand and diverting the Trust's time and effort, as well as members' donations, on image rather than conservation and campaigning was just unjustifiable, especially at this moment in time. So dropping the badger would also have really undermined our history, our heritage, and would have upset the majority of members. It would have disenfranchised volunteers and staff, and it would have resulted in a temporary loss of identity at a time when we really need that visibility and support. So evolution, on the other hand, allows for the old identity and the new identity to coexist. Really, the new one has just had a bit of a facelift, really, and we're very proud of it. And the team, particularly Nathan, our graphic designer, have done a wonderful job, I believe, in giving the badger a facelift. But, we didn't want to have to embark on a really intense and costly renewal. And we haven't had to do that. It was done all in-house, no external costs at all. And that's maintained our solidarity with the external wildlife trust movement. It demonstrates our ability to change while remaining the same. It's the heart of what we're doing. It preserves that sort of positive emotion that you have associated with the trust. The badger is our emblem. It's not our only keystone species. It doesn't necessarily receive a disproportionate amount of conservation effort at all. But it is true that the badger is not without controversy. I completely understand that. But it does continue to be a charismatic species and is still very evocative in the English countryside. And given the government's recent plan to extend the cull with 70,000 badgers culled throughout the UK, the badger continues to need our support. Now, that doesn't mean to say that hedgehogs aren't important. Without doubt, they are, and they need our protection. They've declined massively from 35 million to just over 1 million now across the whole of the UK. And we will support the conservation of the hedgehog through our conservation work and our campaigning, and we will do that very much into the future. But I suppose just an ecological fundamental point to think about. Yes, hedgehogs are predated by badgers, and badgers will have that effect on them. And it's very often the case of badgers will be seen not just from a from a farming and cattle point of view. There's an issue there, but thinking about their predation of hedgehogs, sparrowhawks, they get the same kind of tag. Magpies, they get the same kind of tag. Those predators that kind of eat things can often get labeled that way. But let's not forget, hedgehogs, they eat slugs, they eat worms, they eat beetles. Is a beetle or a worm any more important, than a hedgehog? So, it's ecology. It's about those, food chains. So we mustn't lose sight of the fact that there's an ecological system out there, and we don't want to tinker with it too much or play God with this thing. So we will fight for badgers in Essex. We will fight for hedgehogs, and we will do that equally because they're both iconic species in Essex. Johnny, I believe you're attending today, so hello to you. You have a couple of questions as well. You're talking about land clearance, species extinction, and biodiversity loss, or are all mostly driven by what the world eats and how we farm. Essex Wildlife Trust is probably unusual in the fact that we have two of our own farms. And in light of the statement that I've just said, what is the latest on our farms? Is there a possibility that we can be a beacon of hope and show that wildlife and sustainable food production can exist or coexist? So yes, we have two farms. I believe you're referring to Blue House Farm, which was once a dairy farm, but when we acquired it in 1998, we created a large nature reserve, which has provided a fantastic haven for overwintering wildfowl, for breeding waders, for iconic species such as brown hare. So it's not actually a farm as much as we use cattle to graze the grass to get the right sward height for things like the geese. We don't actually farm Blue House Farm. Abbots Hall Farm, we said at the last AGM that we made the difficult decision to relinquish that arable production in 2019 due to the increasing costs and the economies of scale. So we're not actually currently commercially farming at Abbots Hall Farm, but we are planning to diversify that site in terms of the value that we get for it and the nature that we have on the site. So we will explain more about that, I think, in the new year when we have those new plans more firmly fixed. But Abbots Hall, I think, did prove the point that wildlife and food production can coexist. We were commercially farming, so we had breeding passerines, we had winter finch flocks, we had beetle banks in the fields, we had very healthy population of brown hares, we had barn owls, we had marsh harriers breeding, we had Fisher's estuarine moth. So we had a lot of wildlife on that farm. So I think our commercial farming over the last 15 or so years proves that you can do that and still have a lot of wildlife. Unfortunately, what we did prove was that it's very hard to sustainably farm when you've only got 420 acres, and it wasn't commercially viable. So as much as we proved that farming and wildlife can go hand in hand, we did unfortunately prove that farmers have a lot of issues now in terms of financial viability, in terms of the acreage and those economies of scale. I also think that probably things like the RSPB's Hope Farm has already proved the concept very much of wildlife-friendly farming. The NEP in Sussex has proved brilliantly and demonstrated about rewilding. So from an Essex wildlife point of view, we now need to look at the future niche that we have in terms of our site at Abbots Hall Farm, and what are we trying to demonstrate now, and where are we trying to push it? So what's the next big thing that we're trying to push? As I said, we have some exciting ideas, and you'll hear as soon as possible in the new year about what they are. Johnny, your second question, you said that we seem to have fallen into the trap of that it's land is either for food or for wildlife, while you think that it's we will never save wildlife if we think like this. Our land needs to be both for food and for wildlife, and there are wildlife friendly ways that we can farm that are unconventional, but we can do this, and they're exceptional for wildlife. So that you say that times are changing and people are concerned about the way we eat and manage our land, and it's bonkers to think that wildlife can't exist on areas that aren't nature reserves. And you talk about whether Abbots Hall Farm, or what will happen to Abbots Hall Farm. So in one sense, Johnny, I'm violently in agreement with you. Of course, it can't just be about our reserves. We know that our nature reserves cover only 1.5% of Essex, whereas arable land covers 3/4 of Essex. And therefore, we know that for certain species, there is a big opportunity to protect species. So I'm violently in agreement with you that it's not just about reserves, as much as our reserves are wonderful areas of species richness, but we have to recognise that land must be able to support food production and wildlife. And we also recognise that many farmers and landowners are already enabling this to great effect with novel as well as traditional methods. And we hope to use our farming experience and knowledge working with farmers and landowners to identify and promote ways in which we can together put nature in recovery and grow food in a sustainable way. Things like nature recovery networks is not just about reserves. This is about connecting up all habitats at a landscape scale. And obviously, farmland plays a key role in this. So very much in agreement, Johnny, that it's not just about reserves, and we have to think about how we engage with the farming landscape. Janet Wybro, you're attending as well. So hello to you, Janet. Can or will EWT do anything to help tackle the environmental disaster coming our way from the enormous quantity of PPE and disposable face masks now being used, and which are already being found to litter our beaches and our countryside? Could the public be educated to dispose of them correctly, and importantly, to cut through the ear loops before disposal to avoid affecting wildlife? I certainly think, Janet, that we can do that. I think we can do something. We can tackle this through our various social media channels and our website. We can spread the message of sustainability and responsible disposal of those. We can also talk to our partners, I think, talk to the council. We can talk to our stakeholders and share that sustainability message. And I have to say, throughout COVID, we have unfortunately been experiencing an increase in littering on our nature reserve sites. You know, it's the minority of people, but it's still a big burden on our staff and volunteers, and they've had a very difficult job to sort of reprioritise and manage litter and other items of waste, which has diverted important resources away from those, the actioning of the conservation. So it is a problem, but our sustainability work that we've embarked upon will continue, and we've really highlighted some exciting projects where we can manage waste. And as I said, talk to other people. It's not Essex Wildlife Trust problem to solve waste, but it's our problem to, I guess, share the message and spread that message to as many people as possible, and to be the role model, and also to challenge and lobby people to do things differently. So of course, Janet, we will try and play our part in doing that. John Smart, you're registered to attend as well. So hello, John, morning. You're a great advocate of buying land to extend or create reserves. Has the Wildlife Trust plans to acquire land in the near future? A classic example was the addition of land at Fingering Hoe. Naturally, we can only take advantage of when we have these opportunities. And I love your quote from Mark Twain, buy land, they're not making any more of it. So yes, of course, we'll be supporting and embracing the National Wildlife Trust's 30 by 30 initiative. This is to have 30% of our land and sea to be connected and protected for nature's recovery by 2030. And land acquisition will always be considered by Essex Wildlife Trust as a way of continuing to protect wildlife. However, we're obviously in a county with high agricultural productivity, with significant areas of urbanisation, and the development pressures that this offers, you know, there's challenges for us in terms of affordability. You know, £100,000 doesn't go anywhere near as far as it did 20 years ago, and we have to embrace that, I suppose. And that is a challenge when it comes to acquiring land. but also the mantra of bigger, better, more joined up is something that we've been talking about as ecologists for the last 10 years. And we will continue to do that. If we've got an Essex Wildlife Trust site, it would be much better to make that 50% bigger. If we've got 2 sites, it would be much better to join up those 2 sites. So rather than having lots of pockets in isolation, let's try and have bigger, better, more joined up. And as you said, the extension at Fingering was a wonderful example. And it's about, I guess, influencing and sharing our ambition with our partners and our stakeholders. As I said, it's about working with everyone. If we're talking at a landscape scale, we can't do it on our own. We have to do it with partners. So we have to be spreading that message and talking about these nature recovery networks with other NGOs and leveraging upon things like mandatory biodiversity net gain with planning and all these sorts of things. So we have to work with those partners to bring this together. So apologies if I was going very rapidly there, but I'm mindful of the fact that it can get a bit monotonous, even if you are interested in the answers. So those are all of the questions that we received. So I'm now just going to flick to the Q&A to see if we've had any more. So we had a question previously. Andy Beardsley, you said we used to source most of our food for the cafe locally. We now buy our food from companies like Breaks, so a significant food miles addition in terms of carbon footprint. Can we start sourcing as much food as possible locally to each centre, or at least in Essex? So it's a good question, Andy, and a very fair question. And I suppose it's that balance between wanting to support local food, but also if we are a commercial venture, if we're giving someone a piece of cake, if we're giving them a bowl of soup, if we're giving them a bacon sandwich, whatever we're giving them, people demand a certain quality and they demand a certain taste. So as much as I would love everything to be delivered locally, I would want to cut all of our food miles down. We still have to bear in mind that we are still delivering to a customer, and that customer is demanding a certain thing. So if there is a locally sourced product which we could use, but for whatever reason it's substandard or is 5 times as much money as something else, we have to make that balanced judgment. And it's a difficult one, because obviously we want to buy locally, we want to support that. So I can totally assure you and hopefully reassure you that where possible we will always try and source stuff locally, but it's not always possible. And this is a kind of journey. We will still, if anyone knows of places where you think, well, you're getting product X from miles away, I know of something locally, please let us know, and we can always trial products and we can test things out. So we will do everything we can, but as I said, it is that balancing act, because customers demand certain things from us and we can't always deliver those from local products. Can you give this is from Nicola Wilson. So can you give an update on work on inclusivity, please? Of course, Nicola. So we have an inclusivity group which we set up. And inclusivity can obviously mean many different things. It's about accessibility, it's about diversity, it's many things to many people. But we have this group that was set up to look at the work of the Trust in terms of everything that we do, in terms of how inclusive we are, in terms of the visitors that we have. Are we approachable? Do we have a broad suite of people coming to our visitor centres? Our volunteers, are we inclusive in terms of the people that come volunteering? Our membership, does our membership represent the broad population of Essex? Is that true? In terms of our staff, how does that look in terms of inclusivity? Indeed, in terms of our board, we've got a very, I think you would have seen from the graphic, we now have a very diverse board going forward, which is very exciting for us. And we're challenging ourselves all the time to think about inclusivity and diversity. As I said, we don't want to be seen as a nature club. Conservation really does labour under a very much kind of white middle class stereotype. And we have to challenge that. That's not just Essex, that's conservation as a whole. Conservation, out of over 200 sectors, conservation or environmental was the second worst, most diverse sector out of those 200. So we really need to challenge that in terms of that inclusivity. So we are committed to doing it. That group that was set up, as I said, was looking across the organisation, was setting a baseline of where we are now, benchmarking us against other organizations, setting some targets for us in terms of that inclusivity. And we, as I said, we will be challenging ourselves across all areas of the organization and across all areas of our operations to really make sure that we as an organization represent equally the people of Essex. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. You won't suddenly see, you won't suddenly go into one of our visitor centres, or you won't suddenly look at our staff list and see diversity just like that. But we are committed, we are making changes, we are making progress. And as we make those changes and progress, we will communicate those to you either on the website or through the magazine, and we will celebrate that because it's something that we'll be proud of. Because this isn't box ticking. This isn't just because we feel pressure to do this. This is because as an organisation, we want to represent Essex as a whole. And that means being inclusive and having that inclusive offer. So hopefully that answers your question. Wendy, you were just wondering about the role of Mike Dilgett as the patron during these challenging times. I was hoping to have heard more from him. I think, again, that's a very fair question, Wendy, in terms of Mike's engagement. When you have a patron, they're often kind of quite either have a high profile or a very high profile, and their time is very precious. But I agree that I think we want to get more from Mike as our patron. So we have contacted Mike and are in the process of starting to understand what we can do more with Mike and what his time can, or his time commitments are. I think we were talking about potentially maybe having a column in the magazine or something like that. That's not guaranteed yet, but we were talking about more engagement with him, potentially coming to an AGM. So, and just reaffirming whether he is still got the time to be patron, and if he is, what he would be doing. So you're right. There's no point having a patron if they're not going to be seen or heard or do anything. And as you say, at this time of COVID, it's really important to have an active patron. So completely take your question. It's a very valid one. And we will be talking to Mike, and we'll let you know as soon as we've got a way forward with that. Question, how has the COVID situation affected the volunteer section? You have mentioned trouble with litter on the reserves and the subsequent demands on staff. Could volunteers be recruited specifically to litter clear, and could surely be organised in a social distanced way? So yes, it has affected our volunteering very substantially. We've got about 2,000 volunteers, and during COVID, we didn't have any volunteers because of restrictions, obviously, and we didn't want to have any volunteers coming to any of our sites. So we obviously had our nature discovery centres closed. They weren't coming to there. We didn't have any work parties. We didn't have any events. So we stopped volunteers. And as I said, we very much came back in a phased approach. So we didn't just rush back. So we've done it in a phased approach. We are starting to let volunteers coming back, but a lot of those volunteers still do fit in the vulnerable category, over 75. So we have to be very careful. As much as we have volunteers champing at the bit to want to come back, and we love the fact that they want to do that, but we have to be very respectful of the situation and look after their health and well-being. So we have to monitor that. Yes, we're having small groups now, and yes, they are being socially distanced, but we're taking it step by step. In terms of picking up litter, now I wouldn't like to assume that we just immediately think volunteers, they can go and pick the litter up. Some might be more than happy to do that, but I certainly wouldn't want to just suggest that that's what we're going to get volunteers to do. But I think we have to challenge the litter picking more with the council and more with the people of Essex, rather than just assuming that we have to pick it up. That would be where I would try and challenge it top down as much as bottom up. But yes, I'm sure some volunteers could come and help us, and I'm sure many volunteers would be more than happy and welcome to do that. But that's a very long-winded answer to sort of say, yes, we can certainly do that, but we have to tread very carefully with our volunteers. They're important to us, and we have to think about their well-being. So we'll tread carefully in terms of that coming back. Johnny, thanks for the comprehensive answers. Not at all, Johnny. Thanks for your questions. Roger, is there any plan to reopen the car parking area at Brooks Nature Reserve in the near future, or is there an issue which prevents this from happening? It's finally happened, Roger. You've got the question that I don't have the answer to. You get a gold clock for doing it. Someone has to do it. But jokes apart, Johnny, I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know the specifics of the nature reserve at Brooks Reserve. I'm sure there is a good reason for it. We wouldn't just close it if there wasn't a good reason. If you're happy to either contact us via email, or if you're happy to put your email address in the question box. I will get you an answer specifically emailed across to you on Monday, and I'll give you that answer, but I don't actually know the specifics, but there will be a good reason for doing it. So please do get in touch with us either on the phone or email, and I'll give you an answer on Monday. I think that is the last question I can see. So you've probably heard enough about questions from me because I have been rapidly whizzing through them. Apologies if you felt I've gone through them too quickly, but I wanted to try and rattle through them. I'll leave the questions there, and we'll just move on to a few kind of final things, really. I would just like to move on to a final note, really, and that is to talk to you about the Ray Marsh Award. So last year, you will, those of you who came to the AGM, or you will have seen in the magazine that we introduced the Ray Marsh Award for volunteering. Ray actually joined us in the marquee last year. It was a wonderful thing to have him come up, and he was awarded the inaugural award in his name. So Ray was awarded for 60 years voluntary service, principally for his work at Skipper's Island. Quite amazing man, very humble, and such commitment over 6 decades. And he really embodies everything that's good about the Trust. Let's not forget the Trust was founded by volunteers, and volunteers, as I've just said, are at the heart of everything that we do. And I just felt it was really right and proper that we should have a volunteer award going forward. And it's lovely that, you know, Ray will live on in perpetuity forever because of his Ray Marsh Award. And as I said, it was great having Ray there, and hopefully he'll hear about the new award for this year. And I'm delighted to announce that this year's recipient of the Ray Marsh Award for volunteering is John Thorogood. So John has been volunteering for the Trust for 50 years. Amazing. 5 decades of commitment to the Trust. Now, he started in 1970s, and some of his earliest recollections of volunteering are attempting to hand dig the scrape at Fingering Hoe, only to see his efforts washed away by every high tide, which is quite a funny story. I chuckled when I heard that. But he was chairman of the Colchester local group for a while, and during that time he welcomed David Bellamy when he visited Fingering Hoe. He also got accompanied by Bill Oddie around the he was accompanying him around the concrete perimeter of Abberton Reservoir prior to Bill opening the first visitor centre at Abberton. That site is obviously now underwater, and John has had a very long involvement with the reservoir at Abberton, as his grandfather helped with the original construction during the 1930s. And John spent a lot of time in his childhood playing around Layardilla Hay. So John represents the Essex Birdwatching Society on the management committee at Abberton Reservoir Visitor Centre for a number of years, and was involved in the choice of the architect for the design of the new visitor centre. He's been tirelessly dedicated to Iron Latch Nature Reserve, where he has been a warden for a number of years. And before that, he was the warden of Roman River Valley Nature Reserve for a number of years. Although I have to stress, John is not alone in being part of the 50-year-plus club, which is quite incredible. But we can only pick one person each year. But there are a number of candidates, so I'm sorry we only give it to one person. But his continual dedication and involvement has made him a standout candidate this year for his Ray Marsh Award, as well as the huge range of things that he's involved with the Trust over all of that time. So John has retired from wardening at Iron Latch now and from coordinating the Wade account at Abberton, but he continues to attend as a participant and is he's got a very keen interest in helping out literally wherever he can. I'm really pleased that the Trust won't be losing him as a volunteer altogether, though, and I'm literally blown away by his dedication, which has just made such a huge difference to the reserves that he's worked with and all of the influence that he's had across Essex and Essex wider landscape. Literally everyone I speak to will say what a pleasure it is to work with John. His calm and considered manner means that all of his work that he's completed has been done with the utmost care and the minimal fuss. Yet again, just like Ray Marsh, John is a very humble man and completely expressed his surprise when he received his award last week. He was presented it by Kelly Osborne, and it was a real shock to him, but I'm sure you'll agree it is hugely well deserved. So although we can't give him an audible round of applause, I think we should give him an electronic round of applause, because it's huge congratulations to John Thorogood, who is this year's recipient of the Ray Marsh Award. So congratulations to John. Very, very well done. And appreciated for all of your efforts. Outstanding. So thank you, John. So that's really time for me to wrap up proceedings really this morning. We've been going for about an hour and a half, so I hope you've enjoyed our first digital AGM. I don't want to jinx it now by saying it went effortlessly and smoothly and without any problems, but it seems to have gone really well. So please do let us know. Give us some feedback. How was it for you? What worked well? What didn't work well? We're always very willing to accept feedback. That's how we develop as an organisation. That's how we improve, and that's how we can change things going forward. Maybe next year. So let us know your thoughts, please. I want to say a big thank you to Storm Events for hosting today's event. Fantastic. Thank you to have you on board for that. Thank you again to our President, Professor Jules Pretty, for his inspiring words and for chairing proceedings today, and for Bob Holmes for taking us through the finances. Thanks to all the staff and volunteers associated with the Trust. There are too many to mention, I'm afraid, individually, but they are central to the success of the organisation and at the heart of everything that is positive and ambitious about the Trust. People are at the heart of it. They were at the heart of it when we founded the organisation 60 years ago. 61 years ago now, but it's people that are at the heart of the Trust, and it's thank you to the staff and volunteers. This has been a really challenging time of late, and I truly believe that we are a stronger organisation for it. Finally, I want to thank you as members, for embracing the technology today and for your continued support of the Trust through these incredibly challenging times. I say it a lot, but it is true that we simply couldn't do what we do without you. Without your support, without that kind of energy, without that passion, without the numbers of people behind us, we couldn't do what we do, and we're extremely grateful for that. So I think that's it today, unless anyone wants to butt in and tell me that I've forgotten something and that we need to cover something else. But I think I want to say, have a safe journey back. So have a safe journey going to your living room or wherever you're heading next. But take care. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in person very soon next year for the AGM.